So, Father Geoffrey Korz is agreed to come and be our guest speaker this afternoon. He's the priest, as he said, of All Saints of North America in Hamilton, Ontario. He helped to found the OCF, Orthodox Christian Fellowship at McMaster University, also the Orthodox Canada Journal, the Desert Wisdom Book Room, and the Canadian Council for Religious Freedom. He's spoken very broadly on the subject of changes in views of marriage and how we as Orthodox can respond to these. Over the years, he's worked for over 20 years in education, has written and spoken widely on these issues impacting our families and everyday life as Orthodox. Father Geoffrey finally holds degrees in political science, theology, education, and has worked in public service prior to his ordination. So he's here with us today as our guest speaker for our second annual St. Peter and Febronia Marriage and Family Life Retreat. So please welcome, and we're very thankful to have you here today.
Thanks very much, Father. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It was sort of providential when Father John called me and asked me to come, and he mentioned that he was in Williamsville, New York. 20 years ago, I did my part of my teaching training at Middle School, just a few blocks away.
Oh my gosh, just a couple of blocks from my house.
My
My kids went there.
It's a small world. So it's when you have experiences like that, of course, it makes you reflect on how things have changed in 20 years, how much the world has changed. And 20 years ago, we would have never have imagined that things would be the way they are now technologically. We didn't know, Canada hadn't exported such treasures as Justin Bieber. So I was happy to get rid of it. And neither of our countries had experienced the kind of social changes that we have obviously experienced very rapidly in probably the last 10 years, which have touched all our lives in one way or another. This is not explicitly a spiritual talk. I apologize for that, but in the second half of the talk, I hope to offer a spiritual perspective on the issues that I raised in the first half of the talk. Also, I'm no expert in the American society. I've never lived in the United States. I've spent a lot of time here in various states, east, west, north, and south. We don't have north and south in Canada because we live all along the border. So I could be wrong if this talk is taken as a prediction of things that will happen in the United States based on 10 years experience of this trend in Canada. I could be completely wrong. Things could unfold differently, but I doubt it. Probably our countries are similar enough that things will very likely unfold roughly in a similar way. The U.S. Supreme Court decision to abolish marriage as we know it really was no surprise probably to most people. It certainly was no surprise to Canadians. 10 years ago, when our courts and legislatures, happened in different ways in different provinces, made the decision to redefine marriage in Canada, it was something of a surprise because almost all of those politicians who had said that they would defend marriage changed their minds, flipped over. And those who we thought were the most dependable defenders of the traditional view of marriage were conservative politicians. Many of them, not all of them, but at least half of them just went silent because of the fear of being a lightning rod for public criticism. And this, of course, is one of the risks of our times. We're paralyzed with fear of people not liking us. In Canada, that's a highly esteemed value. The highest value in Canadian society is people liking you. And perhaps this is why we had this experience 10 years before you did, because to disagree with someone in Canada is anathema, and which makes for some pretty strange spiritual dynamics in our country, unfortunately. When our courts redefined civil marriage 10 years ago, The one thing that was surprising was that Orthodox and other religious leaders were almost silent. That was very discouraging to a lot of us. In the United States, at least, you had a lot of spiritual leaders and civil leaders who weren't silent, who said something about it. In Canada, people just sort of took their blanket, went off in their corner, and were wrung their hands about it. I would suggest, though, that the U.S. court decision isn't, in fact, a singular event. It's really just a symptom of a larger condition that exists in our Western society. And it really doesn't matter where you go. You could walk through the streets of Brisbane, or you could walk through the streets of London, or Toronto, or Vancouver, or any American city, and the symptoms are really the same. We're experiencing the same condition. So it should be no surprise when justices or legislators make these kind of changes. We shouldn't be taken aback like suddenly they've lost their minds, because of course this has been a long time coming. Somebody pointed out that Justice Kennedy, I believe he was the swing vote on the Supreme Court here, he was a Republican appointee, and he was supposed to be one of the good guys sort of defending family values, but he was not. So this trend in the American Supreme Court situation has been unfolding for a long time, dating back 20 or 30 years, and those who have been paying attention could have seen it coming. One reaction that we have seen in Canada, and I think probably you're experiencing here too, arises out of a misunderstanding of this. The idea that we are still a culture made up of Christians, and all we have to do is work really hard to win back what we've lost to an elite group of radicals who've kind of taken over institutions and changed them. And they've just worked really hard. If we just work really hard back, we'll get it back. Because really, most people are on our side. I can certainly say in Canada, that's not the case. Most people are not on our side. A lot are, maybe a third, but a third is not a majority make. And many people want to sort of live and do whatever you want. And whatever the impact that may have on our life in a community or our schools or whatever it is, well, they're kind of willing to live with the consequences. We are not in a position where we just have to win back political or legal machinery. The fact is most, or at least many people who would have 50 years ago called themselves Christians, even in the broadest sense of the term, have abandoned traditional Christianity. And this change in the legislative status, the legal status of marriage is just a result of that. There's an interesting book by a sociologist who's also a Methodist minister here in the States. It's called Almost Christian, and it studies 18 to 25-year-olds, which I guess the book's now about 3 years old, or 4 years old, so those young people would be older. And it says some really insightful things about 18 to 25-year-olds who call themselves Christians and who are active in whatever church they go to, okay? Now it throws Mormons in with that category, but they're, a tiny little number. So you've got mostly Catholics and Protestants, and some Orthodox as well, a tiny sliver of the sample. But this huge number, I think 25,000 people in the sample, 25,000 that call themselves Christians that attend church. I think the number was at least twice a week. It was certainly once a week. So these are folks that grew up, went to their youth groups, were the keen ones in their churches. And more than 80% of these young people lose their faith when they go to college. That's terrible. That's disastrous. Just to keep numbers the same, work would have to be overwhelming, and the grace of God would have to be mighty to retain those young people who lose their faith. Or our strategy of how we live has to change. Because why do they lose their faith? Well, because they're in college, right? Not because they're working in the local drugstore. They're in an environment which sucks their faith out of them. And that's something we have to think of strategically as we live or choose how we want to live our lives. The conditions leading to the change in marriage laws started long before the Supreme Court. They started with how we raise our kids and what we teach in our churches. And I would suggest to you that for many, many years, in almost every case, in terms of Orthodox churches, just to step away from criticizing the Protestants and the Catholics for a minute, in Orthodox churches, we have ducked these issues totally. We do not tend to hear mention of issues to do with social issues of the day in our churches. We certainly do not speak to our young people about issues of sexuality. And I would say in many parishes we have even ducked the question of how to deal with the passions and sin so that you can overcome them. If you want to be successful in living a Christian life, you have to have strategies to do that. And our churches have not done that, I would argue, because as communities that are largely made up of people of the immigration, we want to fit in, and we don't want to rock the boat. We want to be good citizens. We want to be good Americans and good Canadians, and not cause any ruffled feathers. Well, the time for that's gone. That didn't work. We've tried that since probably for the last century. It's failed. Today, the talk's going to have two parts. First is lessons from Canada, what Americans could expect, or should expect. I think it's probably should expect, but let's say could expect. I'll try to be more honest with the expectations. And then the second part is lessons from Canada, how Orthodox Christians can respond. And through this, I expect we'll touch on various times the differences between the American situation and the Canadian situation. Because culturally, we are a little bit different, even though I was able to drive for 15 minutes from the border today. We're not that far. I mean, it wasn't really a hard drive for me. But when you cross that river, when you cross that border, something does change in terms of the makeup of our cultures. Canada very much has a history of getting along even when you disagree, and in fact not mentioning the fact that you disagree with someone. It's considered almost socially rude to publicly disagree with someone. Whereas in the United States, you have a much stronger sense of individualism, taking action when you believe something. Depends obviously on the regions of the states. There are different characters, just like Canada has its regional characters. You definitely have a more litigious culture here. So your court system is much busier and allows for people to take legal action on things. That's very rare in Canada, or much more rare. And I would suggest that Americans are much more eager than Canadians to legislate and litigate about things. So that is a little bit of a different situation, and it does impact on how this change in the view of marriage has come about, or the legal view of marriage has come about, and how we could or should respond. So what's the last decade taught Canadians? The one very obvious one right off the top is that we should expect an ever-increasing attacks on religious freedom. When court decisions sweep away the last remnants of Christianity in a society, we can't live on the fumes anymore. I would argue that since I was a child, we've been living on the fumes. Even people who weren't Christians, even people who were atheists, still lived with essentially Christian values, a way of looking and dealing with each other that was Christian. Even the idea of human rights, the idea that a human being has value just because of a human being, that's a residual Christian value. The idea that we shouldn't treat people differently because they're a different race, it's a residual Christian value, the idea that God created us in His image, right? So even in a secular society for one generation after the disappearance or elimination or both of Christianity, you still have the residue of that. I often say it's living off the fumes. It's like driving. Actually, it's a good analogy because there's only 10 kilometers left on my gas tank getting here. I didn't have time to get car problems. I called Father up, and so I only had 10 kilometers left. So I had enough to get around the corner and fill up my gas tank. That's kind of where we are as a society in terms of what's left of the Christian influence in our society. Almost 70% of North American kids have no experience of church. You know, we assume that if we say Noah's Ark, that people have a reference point. That's not a really complicated or rare Old Testament story. It's not like going into the book of Samuel or something and finding something obscure. That's one of the biggies. But that is no longer the case. So with that root being pulled up, as Chesterton says, you can't pull up the root and not expect to lose the flower. We're starting to lose the flower now. And as a result of that, people increasingly will no longer have the restraint that they might have exercised in a Christian society. They won't have the courteousness. They will feel at liberty to respond to people they disagree with in a very aggressive way. This doesn't create a vacuum, by the way. Some people who are anti-religious would say, oh, we just need a neutral public square where there's no religion and then everyone will be treated fairly and the same. Actually, no. Nature abhors a vacuum, and what fills that is actually an anti-religious spirit. And we see that very strongly in the world today. This is very much like the Soviet situation. And I was just talking with some people the other day from the Soviet Union and former Soviet Union and some Christians who lived in the areas now controlled by ISIS. And they said, we see certain trends happening here that remind us of what was happening at home. And nature abhors a vacuum. And if you remove that which is good, the conditions will be filled with something that is evil. And so we're facing that now. We're not necessarily facing ISIS in North America yet, but we are facing an anti-religious spirit. So when people of faith try to express their opinions in the public square, write a letter to the editor, post something on Facebook, they'll be attacked, and there isn't the restraint that there used to be. I have heard in the last number of weeks people who have been concerned about the next step in this phenomenon, which is the revision of sex ed in public schools, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I've heard from people who have raised concerns about not wanting their primary school children exposed to explicit lessons on homosexuality. They've expressed this on a Facebook page, which even I think I'm into these issues and I read about them all the time. But even I think, oh, that's a pretty modest claim, right? Like most people will say, oh yeah, you want to pull your kids out of that. I understand, they're only 7. That's not a big deal. And these people say to me, Father, I think I should get off Facebook. I said, well, you probably should get off anyway, but why do you say that? And they say, because people are tearing me apart over saying maybe I want to take my kids out of this lesson because I'm a terrible, bigoted person. I'm hateful, I'm evil, and I have no place living in a tolerant country. I should live in a theocracy. I should move to Russia, right? and that, unfortunately, is the climate we're in. The second thing related to that is what I would call the new Gestapo, a kind of ugly intolerance disguised as liberal civil rights. There's a lot of labeling that goes on. This started in Canada about 5 years ago, so that public institutions actually have terms that they're now using, such as public school system especially, that they're using for those who hold traditional views, and they would call it where homophobic comes up, right? Which means one of two things. That either means that you have a fear of people like yourself, that's literally what the word would mean, or that you, presumably by modern usage, that you hate people who have same-sex attraction. I deal with lots of Christians of different backgrounds, and I've only met one or two that really hate people who have same-sex attraction and want them dead or something, or want to hit them, or even want to yell at them. In most cases, they just don't want that lifestyle to prevail and don't want to talk to their kids. But that is not what's going on. It's very easy now, and you do see it in the States, I know, to be demonized as a racist, bigoted, homophobic, backward, hateful bigot because you express your views on something simple. And it is not enough just to choose our words carefully because the other side, if I can call it that, the other side, for the other side, victory is never enough. Winning all the laws and overturning all the laws is never enough. They just keep coming. And they will go after you until you are silenced and until really you cease to exist and you've changed your thinking completely to their way of thinking. Of course, this reflects, I said the first part wouldn't be really a spiritual talk, but this is a spiritual reality. This reflects the spiritual backdrop of what's going on behind the scenes spiritually in these movements. You have something that's fundamentally satanic that motivates them, and this is why even when they win, folks that are activists on the other side are so darn angry, incredibly angry. They're also very afraid, and they're afraid of us. And I always thought that was funny because it's not like we're winning any of the battles, right? And it's not like there are mobs of us. We're kind of meek and quiet. We wear unusual clothes and we sort of don't fit in. But there is a fear, and I have to say, as a priest, I experienced this. I experienced this dealing with our public education system, where there are many LGBT activists at these meetings, and they take a step back from me and they sort of cower like I'm going to strike them with lightning or something. I experienced it in spades when we went to San Francisco a few years ago to visit the relics of St. John, and many people that I met living that other lifestyle were afraid. I could see their faces. It was fear. So as Christians, I'll talk about this in the second half, but that's an opportunity for us to actually just be nice to people and kind of build a little bridge without ever giving anything up in terms of what we actually believe or stand for. I'll come back to that. Number 3, the elimination of privacy and public opinion for businesses and private institutions and churches and individuals. Technology makes this worse because everything's immediately a public issue, but every action and opinion we see it now is dragged out into the open for public scrutiny and maybe litigation and maybe losing your job if you hold the wrong views, or if you post something online, you expressed some view 20 years ago and it happens to be chronicled somewhere online and someone finds it. If they find it, you better renounce it. Say, no, I'm like Obama. I've seen the light. I was such a rotten bigot, and now I've changed. Now I've changed. I'm a new man. If you don't say that right away, you're a goner. You're really a goner. I believe this, of course, we've all read the stories about bakeries that can't decide they don't want to bake a rainbow wedding cake, or clergy unsure whether they can speak about their faith on certain issues in the public square for fear someone will come after them. We've got an election going on now for our Canadian Parliament, and one of the issues that's come up is whether women should be permitted to wear the niqab, Muslim women, the niqab, the veil that completely covers the face, while they get their citizenship oath, not just in public. So they have them for their driver's license and all these things, but can you become a citizen of our country and have a veil over your face? And the court said, yeah, you can. So those who express their views against this are very, including our current Prime Minister, are immediately a target. And we now have an environment where any issue becomes an intense fight. That is not a Christian society anymore, where any disagreement becomes an intense fight. Roman Catholics, I think, have been the first and biggest target, but other groups have too. So, for example, the British Columbia College of Teachers decided a few years ago it wouldn't recognize one Christian university in British Columbia in giving out their teaching credentials, not because their program was deficient. The program is exactly the same as every other school, but it was a Christian school, and to be a student there, you had to sign a contract that said you would live by certain principles. It was a Protestant evangelical school, but nothing that any of us couldn't sign. You know, basically that you wouldn't be promiscuous, be sexually active outside of marriage, that you wouldn't do drugs, that you wouldn't crimes, and a number of other things. But the British Columbia College of Teachers argued that this was discriminatory against people who identified as having same-sex attraction. So they said we won't give your graduates teaching certificates, so they can't teach in the province, even though they finished the program. They had to do the program again in an ideologically pure school environment. This went to court. This was one of the court cases, and actually the school, Trinity Western, won. But still, the issue goes on. Several different law societies, each lawyers in our country are certified by each province, like you would have. I don't know if they're certified by state here or not. They're certified by province in Canada. And law societies in most of the provinces have said that if you've gone to a private Christian school, elite law school, that has exactly the same program as a secular school, but if you've had to affirm certain principles, we won't allow you to be called to the bar. And of course, there's a lot of activism that has gone into that as well. We have to keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that the evil one is the father of lies. And so a lot of people are going to believe these lies and act on them, so we shouldn't be surprised when these things happen. A fourth thing that we've learned in the last 10 years is that society will get and is getting more and more sexualized. About 40 years ago, our former Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, said that government should stay out of the bedrooms of the nation. Famous quote in Canadian politics, government should stay out of the bedrooms of the nation. Now his son is the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, and he requires that all candidates publicly affirm that they support same-sex marriage and abortion, which he calls a woman's right to choose. Our candidate where I live said something very dumb the other day. He said, we're not in favor of abortion, we just support a woman's right to choose. That's this very strange sort of twist up, sort of mental twist. The idea that sexual matters should be private is gone. This is all, the bedroom has been brought out into the street. And it's fair game, not just for late night TV. I remember a time when people would say, oh, there are bad things on TV at midnight. At midnight, you don't have to wait for midnight anymore. Any time of the night or day. You have the right connections technologically, you will access whatever you want. Our writers that I read recently said that we have come to a point where rational argument about these issues has come to an end, and now emotion enforced by power is the rule. So this embrace of how I feel really rules the day on any issue. It makes it very, very tough to have a discussion with people who even sort of disagree with you. Because emotion, this raging emotion, immediately kicks in. And many people, I was even faithful Orthodox people, are challenged in just restraining their emotions. That's something that we need to teach our faithful, and especially our kids, because they will not get it from the world. What they will get from the world is the idea that whatever your emotion tells you, do it. Just do it. Because your emotions are a good guide to what is a good idea. Which is, of course, the opposite of an atheist's common sense, right? Emotions probably do not guide us most of the time to make good decisions. Even if we were atheists, we would say that. As Orthodox Christians, we see that there is a spiritual foundation behind our emotions. And the reason we have these emotions that are problematic is that we're spiritually off. And we need to be spiritually healed so that we won't respond emotionally in the wrong way. We won't be ruled by our emotions. In such a deeply over-sexualized culture, very few people are willing, especially in emotional culture, very few people are willing to stand up as critics to anything that goes on. There are very few voices that will say things publicly because the intensity of the emotional response is so great that most people either can't bear it, because it's just too debilitating to be yelled at that much, or just say, I don't want to bear it. I just want to quietly live my life. I don't want to have to withstand people criticizing me at work or sitting at a different lunch table at school or work and leaving me out all the time. I just don't want to go there. I don't want to deal with those issues. So what we have seen, unfortunately, is that many Christians have compromised on these issues. I would say this is where the Orthodox Church has a tremendous contribution to make, helping people survive and endure in this environment, so that we address our own sins and our own need to repent and receive the grace of God through the holy mysteries of the Church, so that we don't cave. Because it's very easy to cave if you want to just fit in with people around you and not lose friends. I've had a number of young people, I deal a lot with people in their 20s, and I've had a number of young people say to me, if I talk to them about my faith, I'll lose all my friends. And my response is, yeah, you will. They're not really your friends. But it's going to be really painful for you to let them go, because you made these attachments, perhaps when you didn't believe, when you weren't in the church, or when you were marginal, and now you're more serious. This immersion in sexual themes and topics and images, unfortunately, together with paralysis of acting, people not wanting to act, has led to a new privatization of individual life. The idea that people will only talk publicly about things that they have in common. So that anything you aren't sure you can safely talk about, you will only talk about it privately. Which means people are isolated from one another, right? I mean, if you can only talk about the Buffalo Bills or something, or maybe not even that, right? Because maybe they're not a fan. If you can only talk about sports and the weather, and you can't talk about meaningful things, that's a serious barrier to any sort of friendships, relationships, getting to know people. I hear from young people very often, and of course we see a lot of young people, majority of young people today, who can't find someone even to date and court on an ongoing basis, let alone marry. I hear from them, it's very hard to get to know someone. Well, of course it is. If you can't talk about things that really matter, right? If all you're talking about is what you saw on the MSN homepage or what you do in your spare time, it becomes very hard to become close to someone. This also has an impact in our neighborhoods where people don't talk to their neighbors. I was recently in Calgary, Alberta, out west, halfway across our country. Calgary is a city made up of people almost entirely that have moved there to work at one time or another over the last 30 years because of the oil in the central Canada. It's a huge city, 1 million people. Almost no one's born in Calgary. Unless you're under 10, you probably have not been born in the city you live in if you're in Calgary. What one gets a sense of in a city like that is people don't talk to each other and they don't know their neighbors. They know the people they work with. They might know people they're part of some organization with, a sports organization or a church or something like this. But in terms of a closeness with anyone in their immediate neighborhood, it's just not there. It's just not there. And that combines with driving your car everywhere. And you've got people with no network of support, and with no neighbors they can call on in an emergency. And all the social effects of this become real. For example, women who have a baby and they're at home alone with the baby. When I was a little guy, my mother could go, she said to me, to 4 neighbors and ask for help. She knew 4 neighbors well enough that she could give me to them and they would take care of it. Can you imagine doing that today? Can you imagine even having 1 neighbor you could go to today? And unfortunately, this issue of marriage, because it's so fundamental and it has so strongly divided people, it's become this hot button, certainly in Canada, where people don't want to get too close to each other. And that has huge social implications beyond just, is this going to be allowed under civil law? This is the point I thought of on the way down, and I'm sorry I didn't think about it before because I think it needed to be developed more, but one of the things we've seen quite tragically is the loss of people who have held to Christian truth. I'm speaking broadly, okay? I'm talking about heterodox people as well. But even among the Orthodox, we've seen a loss of people. I think, for example, when we came into the church almost 20 years ago, we were very encouraged by some of the writings and the talks of Frank Schaeffer, who was a real champion of the importance of returning to the historic church and all the good things that the Orthodox Church has to offer. Unfortunately, he has kind of gone off the rails, and he recants now a lot of the things that he said that were encouraging to people who are trying to live an Orthodox life. We have a journalist in Canada, Michael Corrin, who was a Roman Catholic and up until very recently spoke about these kind of issues of life issues and family issues and values in ways which, if I put him in here and you didn't know better, you would have thought he was an Orthodox Christian. Really, you couldn't have distinguished him from an Orthodox speaker. But in the last 6 months, he's decided, well, all of that was wrong, and I lost too many friends for holding those views, and so now I'm going to chuck them out. And I've got lots of new friends now in the media, and people who will embrace me. That's something we're going to have to get used to, brothers and sisters, not just in terms of celebrities, but in terms of people we know, people in our churches, people in our families. There are cases, if you spend enough time on the internet, you find everything. There are cases of Orthodox clergy who have given up the faith, monastics who have decided to take up a different lifestyle, and who've fallen away from Christ, fallen away even maybe believing in God, because it's simply hard. And we aren't even being chased down by the police and crucified yet. We're just being disliked at work or something. So, who knows what's in the road ahead. But if we can't take this, what's it going to look like if things get worse? The sixth thing I would say that we learned is the redefinition of words. Just like in the Soviet Union or in George Orwell's book 1984, words the meaning of words have been spun on its ear. So that words like tolerance, which used to mean putting up with anybody that you disagreed with. I remember when I was a kid, I was raised Protestant, and we had to tolerate the Catholics, right? Because they were radically different than we. Today it's almost laughable, right? Because then you have a conservative Catholic and a conservative Protestant, they're buddies now, right? But in those days, it was better than they was. You don't spend too much time with those Catholic girls because you might want to marry one. You don't want to do that. Just tolerate them. Just tolerate them. Well, tolerance now, of course, is used as a word to silence people of traditional views. Because you're intolerant because you disagree with someone who holds a different view. Of course, those who advocate tolerance are telling those with traditional or Christian views that we should shut up. Right? So where's the tolerance? But that's the nature. The word hate. The word hate. Basically, any disagreement is considered hate. I've suggested that if we want to be very spunky, of course the Church Fathers gave us lots of examples of how to respond. We can respond by being low-key and quiet. We can also respond by having a real spark, if that's what we're given. I suggest that we should use these words that have been redefined to our advantage and say if we're confronted by some aggressive Dan Savage-like gay rights person. I'm not talking about people who are living same-sex lifestyles, because some of them just do so quietly. I'm talking about really angry, aggressive activists. I think we should immediately say, why are you pulling out so much hate against me? Why have you got so much hate? I think we need to curb your hate. We need to use their language, actually. We need to throw it back at them. We need to call them to be accountable for their inconsistencies. And we have to have the guts to do that, or we will constantly be on the defensive and just be being thrashed by their attacks. We have to learn their approach and use it. Unfortunately, the redefinition of words has seen a dumbing down of meaningful discussion and debate. I recall I was speaking with a young Orthodox man who was one of the most successful university-level debate team members in the country. I think he might have won the top prize for debaters in the country. And I said, oh, debating is fascinating thing to do. It develops so many skills that are useful in other areas of life. What topics do you debate? And I threw up the great controversies that we used to debate of abortion and capital punishment, sexual issues that really have some meat on them. He said, oh no, we can't debate those in a university setting. I said, well, why? That's what makes it fun. I mean, that's the point of debating. He said, oh no, because those issues are considered closed. Right? Closed. You're not allowed to have a different view on those issues. That's a problem, because societies that have decided that issues are closed are no longer free societies. They no longer allow you to express your views freely. Now, as Orthodox Christians, it's not like we believe that democracy is only one step away from salvation or something. It's not like we have to have a democracy and it's the most perfect system for Orthodox Christians. But as Churchill says, it's the worst system except for all the rest. It's good for us as Orthodox Christians to enjoy the benefits of a free society where we can actually practice our faith without being killed or arrested, and say what we have to say freely and respectfully without being jailed. And when things start to move away from that, there are definite problems. This is reaching, of course, into academia. We've seen this very much in Canada, that there's an overarching control of ideas in spoken or written form in classes. So what was, say, 15, 20, 25 years ago, a desire to have inclusive language, like not using the word mankind because it has the word man in it, but use humankind. This was a big push a quarter century ago. That's now led to the ideological rinsing of pretty much every word someone writes or says in a post-secondary school. That's a problem, and it does raise the question of why are we investing our money in these post-secondary schools to send our kids there as Orthodox Christians if that's what they're getting. Do they want just a piece of paper? That's fine. You can get that through online courses, and you don't have to endure the brainwashing or the student debt. I always say this to our kids. They come out of school with a $50,000 student debt because they're away at school in this environment which tears their faith out of them. Why not get your degree another means that doesn't constantly afflict you with these ideological attacks? The final thing I would say that we've learned, and maybe this might be a good thing, is the importance of the growth of alternate media. It used to be when I was a kid that we had one daily newspaper, the Town Spectator, the Buffalo News. And everybody got their news from one source. And if you turn on the television, you have three sources, right? You have the big three, CBS, NBC, and ABC, right? And that's what we turned on Saturday mornings to watch as cartoons, and that's where we got news, that's where we got coverage of historical events. It all came to us through the same media. Well, thank God it doesn't now, because if it did now, we'd be in a truly hopeless situation, but that's not the case. I always find it funny how God uses these historical changes with almost a sense of humor. Like He used the Roman roads were built. Why were they built? So that Rome could invade the world and conquer the world. But who used them? The Apostle Paul, and he evangelized all these places. I don't really believe that the Lord in heaven is giggling at the situation, but there is a certain irony to the way in which God uses even things that are wicked. And our modern technology, such as the internet, is full of wickedness. It's full of wicked things. But now it also allows us to find other people who share our values, to learn from others who've gone through the same experience. And this is how Father John and I got in touch, right? We don't live that far apart, but we live on opposite sides of an international border. We might never have met had it not been for the internet. connections that it gives. This also has led, and we definitely see it in Canada, to something they've experienced in the Netherlands, which they call the pillarization of society. So that your friends and your school and your church and your soccer club and your credit union and your political party are all made up of the same people. So you have common interests in every area of life with certain people. You share the same news, you share the same humor, you share the same entertainment, you share the same preferences in education, you probably share the same voting patterns. And this is the flip side of that isolation that is a result of these controversial issues. That we can actually find other people that agree with us. The only problem is people of differing views don't simply avoid certain people, but can fall into the habit of avoiding everybody that's not like them. The good side of the growth of alternative media, which I'll talk about in the second half, is that we have a means to reach each other. We are not now enjoying, nor will we enjoy, the kind of shared, safe public square where everybody's hearing the same information and discussing the same things that we have in the last 100 years. It used to be that people who would disagree with you could still live near you and like you and share their tomatoes over the fence. Now, when we disagree on fundamental issues of the new morality, we're not just wrong, but we're evil, we're the enemy, and we need to be destroyed. So it is important for us, and I'll say this as a segue to the second part, it's important for us to find strategies to deal with this in civic society, but also, more importantly, spiritually, how to respond to these conditions. And in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Are there any questions? That's part one. Yes?
Yeah. You know, this intolerance of being able to hear other people's opinions and, you know, I first noticed it in this country, not with this issue actually, or felt it really strongly, and I'm not saying this is a political thing or anything, this is where I first noticed it, when we invaded Iraq. And we in this country, nobody could say that you were against invading Iraq, even if you disagreed with that and you could see clear through it that it was a setup, you know. That's where I saw that first, and that's a totally different context than what you're talking about. Is it just that, I think what you're saying is it's just this loss of Christianity as the backdrop to all of society that makes that kind of thing possible.
That's right.
Now that sort of makes sense to
That's
me.
right. Yeah, because Christianity, Orthodox Christianity specifically, Christianity in the most general use of the term, and the residual Christianity that just teaches people to be polite. They're civilized influences, right? Mm-hmm. They make an impression on the human soul. So how do you so we have the opposite situation with Iraq and Canada. In Canada, if you said you supported it in any way, for any reason, and there were some good reasons, I mean on the surface there were some good reasons, you didn't want the bad guys to get back in there, and right on the surface level there was that argument. You couldn't make those arguments in Canada. You were just a nut. You were not. They would say, you're an American. That's an insult in Canada, by the way. They never say it in a good sense, right? Like you're showing courage or you're showing generosity or something. It's always just the negative things. But it was the same phenomenon, though. It was the same intolerance of open debate. And really, I mean, historically that's what happens, right? When there's a spiritual vacuum, we fall back into ideology and the state becomes God, right? Whatever the state is doing, and it doesn't matter right or left, right? Some people will say, well, that's kind of maybe that's a political statement. It doesn't matter right or left. I mean, it could be the Nazis or it could be the communists. You know, in many ways, they're the same. What they did, certainly what they did to the church was very, very much the same. I think we'll see it more. And perhaps it's just become the way things, the new normal, the way things are. Yeah. But our challenge as Orthodox Christians is to be Christians in the midst of this, which means we have to attend to ourselves, which I'll talk about in the second half, because if we don't attend to ourselves, what we will become is just legalistic Orthodox Christians who believe all the right things and say the Nicene Creed and say our prayers every day and do everything by the book, but we're just full of hate and we're full of anger. And I deal sometimes with people who are going through this pastorally in their own lives, that they haven't found a way to cope with this new situation as a Christian should cope with it. I deal with some of our churches with a lot of people from the former Soviet countries, and one of the complaints that comes up often is that these people, say early 30s, who grew up in the Soviet Union, that's all they learned. They learned to behave like a Soviet. And now that they're baptized Orthodox Christians who sit on the parish council, they still behave like a Soviet, except they are wearing a 3-barred cross. And they're proud of it. And that's not enough. If we're going to really be Christians, and we're going to be Orthodox Christians, then we have to be living the life that the gospel calls us to live, that the saints and church fathers lived, or we really don't have much other than just a competing hammer to offer the world. Right? I'll hammer you with my Orthodox hammer, and you hammer me with your atheist hammer, and that's all we're left. We have to be, the scriptures tell us that the early Christians were known as Christians because of their love. They were recognized. Well, you're a Christian. Well, how did I know that? Because of what you wore or because of what you condemned? No. Because you showed mercy to your enemies. They didn't cease to be your enemies, but you showed mercy to them. You showed love to them. That was weird in the ancient world. And how we respond to these those who are opposed to us, it's a critical part of the whole dynamic. I remember a few years ago, we were making a clergy presentation to the local public school board, and there were large delegations there. There were about 100 people that were largely Christians of one sort or another who came, mostly evangelicals, some Orthodox, thankfully. And then there were about 200 of them, and then there were about 100 gay activists. And I was late, as I usually am, and I came into the lobby of the school board, and it was like the Red Sea. One group was on this side, and one group was on that side, and they weren't even getting physically close to each other. And I walked in, and I walked down the middle of the Red Sea, and half the Red Seas went, hi, hi, hi. Some of them I knew, many of them I didn't, but they were, he's one of ours. He's one of ours. And so that was, nice to be greeted by them, and the other side sort of hissed at me. And I looked up, and the leader of the LGBT activist group was a girl I went to high school with. I knew her very well, for years. So I walked up and said hello to her, and she gave me a big hug. We started chatting about old times, and I realized after about 5 minutes, no one else was speaking. 300 people were standing there, listening to us. What are you talking about? And somebody said to me, how would you talk to her? I said, well, I've known her for 25 years, and I can talk. I disagree with her, and she came to me as a priest and said, what do you think about my lifestyle? I would say, you got to repent. She was actually an apostate Orthodox, which is kind of interesting. But she wasn't asking me that. She just wanted to chit-chat about this and that, and people in the old neighborhood, and that was fine. Now, if I didn't know her so well, it was easy because I knew her, right? But if I didn't know her so well, if she was a stranger, would it have been so easy? I don't know. If she'd been yelling at me, would it have been so easy? Probably not, right? And that's where we have to get to a point in our own lives where we have a drop of holiness so that we can respond like Christians while not selling out our faith, right? I'm not talking about be nice and don't say anything so you can get along. I'm saying that we have to hold the truth and love in equal proportions. Just as the Lord is fully God and fully man, he's 100% each, right? 100% was 100%. It's not logical. It can't. How can you have that, right? Which is the mystery of the incarnation. We have to have 100% love and 100% truth. And that's very hard. But that's our challenge. Another question? Yeah.
I have another. Is that okay? So I teach in the Temple of Satan in the local state university.
We'll edit that out of the video.
Yeah.
What do you teach?
Geology.
Okay.
Yeah. And in science, of course, we don't touch on these issues at all or anything. But I was just one, so I don't really know, but I get the feeling that where I work, that this would happen, that if or somebody expressed these opinions, you know, that we hold, you know, that would be really looked down upon and everything. So I was wondering if you know of the experience of people in universities in Canada with this, you know.
Immediately one came to mind.
Oh.
Actually, immediately one came to mind. I had a friend who was an elementary school teacher who taught at originally in Toronto area, and Greek background, but a very pious and faithful, you know, top-notch Orthodox Christian. She hated me saying that because it embarrassed her. She's not here, so I'll say it. She was very concerned about possibly getting in trouble in school for wearing her cross in a public school, and for suggesting that they be able to sing some Christmas carols at Christmas. Because apparently you should sing more Kwanzaa carols because there are so many people celebrating that in Toronto. Sorry. That's a version. So I said to her, this is what I would do. I would put up, first of all, I would wear the biggest cross you can find. And I would put up a large cross and lots of icons in your room. But make sure they're all from Greece. And then if anyone asks you, say, oh, they're from my homeland of Greece. And I love them. Aren't they beautiful? Why, yes, they are. What lovely cultural pictures you have there. Right? So as a result, she was able to have basically an icon corner in a public elementary school classroom. Now, obviously the dynamic is different, right? You know, you can probably move around classrooms and you're dealing with the variety of students, right? Right. So I would say sometimes we can contextualize things differently. We can say, oh, I got that on a trip, because it is kind of a wedge that eases into the topic for people who might otherwise be hostile. If we must not take up the evangelical approaches of Jerry Falwell. Okay, we're not just Jerry Falwell with beards and cassocks. So this sort of banging in the nose approach is not an Orthodox approach. You'll notice in the lives of the saints, whenever they became, whenever they became assertive, like St. Nicholas striking Arius, right? Or St. Athanasius grabbing the reins of the horse of St. Constantine the Emperor, demanding a church council be called to deal with the Arians, and many other examples like that. Whenever you see those examples, they are dealing with falsehood in the church. They're dealing with other Orthodox Christians who are messing up, who are maybe teaching heresy or allowing falsehood to grow. This is why when I'm with brother priests who start, I'm in the OCA, and Forrest Gump is a member of the Orthodox Church of America, because in the Orthodox Church of America you never know what you're going to get. It's like a box of chocolates. We never know what we're going to get. And thankfully the spectrum is less wide than it was even a few years ago, but we have to be vigilant, because as Father Josiah, who spoke yesterday, wrote in an article I read recently, in any group of Orthodox bishops, if you have 50 or 60 Orthodox bishops, at least 3 or 4 of them are going to be heretics. It's always been that. So we have to we have to be willing to be mild with people outside the church and harsh with those who do falsely inside the church. Call them to account, assertively confront them, I would say. That's where we actually have a greater danger, right? I mean, if some rainbow flag wearing activist comes to my liturgy on Sunday, nobody's going to say, "Oh, I wonder if that's the teaching of the Orthodox Church." No, they're not going to make that mistake. They're going to obviously know this person wandered in, or came on for a reason, or they're the outlier. But if a bishop or a priest or a prominent layman, some academic layman starts advocating false teachings, that's a risk to us, because people might think that's actually our faith, and people might go along with it. I live in a country where there is a deposed deacon of your jurisdiction who went into schism and who was received eventually into our jurisdiction, who taught all sorts of weird things about the soul after death, and some of you might know what I'm talking about. And we live with him all the time, teaching freakish things. And so those of us who are still, most people, because they're so Canadian, just go, "Oh, I can't believe he's doing this." Right? There's a very Canadian response. But a few of us, see, I'm from Hamilton, right? And you're from Buffalo, and I've always considered our cities twin cities in a way, because we've got this sort of grit, right? We're really hospitable and nice and warm until somebody pushes, and then we say, "Hey!" Right? And there's something good about that. So I would say that Orthodox Christians have to kind of recapture that and respond that way to people in the church, whereas people outside the church, we can be assertive but much more mild about things. If we know who we are and we're assertive about it, people don't usually fight. It's when we get sort of nervous and say, "Oh," and apologize, "Oh, well, I'm sorry I brought up that topic, I might not be very sensitive." We can just state things as a fact, right? Well, a lot of people believe this, and let's talk about that. Or this issue is really presenting itself. Or these teachings come up in the context of my class, let's talk about that. And you don't have to set yourself, as a teacher, this is very important, you don't have to set yourself up as the advocate of that point. You can just share the point. And then if people say, "That's terrible," then they're not having a fight with you. You're having a subjective discussion about some issue. Yeah. I remember a student of mine about 10 or 15 years ago, I said, there will come a time in this country, about 10 or 15 years ago, there will come a time in our country when it will be illegal to say in a church sermon that homosexual activity is a sin. And as a priest, if I say that, I will be, and somebody records it on a cell phone and puts it on YouTube or whatever, I will be warned and then arrested for doing that. And I'll be in jail. And this sort of mouthy girl to my class said, "And what do you do? What do you do if you have to make that choice?" And I said, "Well, I'll go to jail. What am I going to do? I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to just avoid the talk all the time. I guess I'll have to go to jail." She said, "And you should." I said, "And honey, I hope you're going to visit me." We have to be assertive and have a sense of humor. That helps a lot. It also helps